My name is Dan Moulthrop, and I want to welcome you to the Four Freedoms Town Hall about creative expression, freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom to worship in one's own way. For the last year and a half or so, since 2016, just before the election, Eric Gottesman, Hank Willis Thomas, who founded the Four Freedoms Political Action Committee, which is now more of your standard 501c3, although not so standard at all, and MoCA Cleveland and the City Club of Cleveland, where I work, have been working together to do a series of town hall conversations about freedoms, the freedoms we cherish in a democracy, the freedoms we value in a democracy, and which ones are most important to us and why. And we've been exploring this in all sorts of ways with a variety of different groups of people. This is another installation in that series, another event in that series, and it also marks the beginning of a massively nationwide creative effort to put 50 billboards in 50 states talking about the freedoms that are most important to us. I want to ask you to do something. If you're just walking into the room and you're thinking, can I sit there? There's a weird sign on the chair. Am I allowed to sit there? Yes, you're allowed to sit there. All of you standing in the back, please find a seat. Please join us and ask yourself this question: what freedom is most important to me? And a lot of you have already done that. You've asked that question. You've answered that question. I want you to turn to the person sitting next to you, ideally the person you haven't already been talking to for the last 10 minutes, and tell them, share with them what freedom is most important to you while other people grab seats and fill out these signs. These signs are going to become a piece of temporary art installed here on the grounds to help frame our experience over the next few days. So take a couple of minutes and talk to one another, please. This is important. If you have a sign and you've completed a sign, send it to the aisle or raise your hand, hold it up, and we'll get it out there as part of the installation. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you back, to bring your attention together. And I'd like a couple of you, if you would, please, to share with the larger group, not the freedom that you care about, but the freedom you just learned that your neighbor cares about. Sir, you are such a help. I'm going to bring you everywhere I go. Tell me about the freedom that your neighbor cares about.
She just sat down, so I'm looking forward to the pleasure and opportunity of exploring that.
Well, tell me the freedom you care most deeply about.
The freedom to be myself and to express my values, my concerns about the rest of the world.
Thank you. Can I get a couple of volunteers to share a freedom that their neighbor cares about? Yes.
My neighbor cares about the freedom to die, which I thought was fascinating.
Thank you. The freedom to die. Let's hear a couple more. It won't all be this, that, yeah. Anyway.
My neighbor cares about the freedom for free health care.
Freedom for free health care. A few snaps for that. You got one?
My neighbor said the freedom of spirit.
The freedom of spirit. Thank you. Couple more here.
Mine said freedom for love.
Freedom for love.
My neighbor said freedom to choose.
Freedom to choose. Oh gosh, this is getting good.
My neighbor said freedom of imagination.
Freedom of imagination.
Freedom for kids to be kids.
For kids to be kids.
For kids to be kids.
Both of you. Okay. And over here, you had your hand up, sir.
No, I will wave system.
Oh, you're just waving? Freedom to wave and say hello and to greet people. Everybody wave to somebody sitting across the way. Thank you. So what we're doing here, I want to acknowledge something about at least my perception of the Aspen Ideas Festival, is that this is a place where that's primarily, the voices you hear are primarily people who think for a living, right? And not necessarily people who create for a living. And we're flipping that around a little bit. Now, I could be wrong. But what I have found, what I know is that, well, let me share with you, in one of the last of these 4 Freedoms town halls, which we did at Mocha, Cleveland, the executive director of an organization that works with the reentry community, with returning citizens, helping to prepare them to join the community, said, you know, when practitioners talk to one another, we all know what we're talking about, and it's flat prose. And when we engage in these conversations that are led by artists, that prose turns to poetry. So that's what we're doing today. There are 4 artists who are seated, or three artists who are seated a little bit higher than others: Eric Gottesman, Tanya Selvaratnam, and Paula Crown. And Hank Willis Thomas is on the bench. We'll explain the bench in a little bit. But Paula, I'd like to start with you, if we could, because your work is centered here. Solo Together, these red solo cups, both on these pedestals and also spread around the floor. Tell us about them.
So I think the most interesting things in the planet are invisible. Gravity, our feelings, our emotions, quantum physics. And I have been brought into this world. I'm in this world with a special capacity to see and to notice things. And what I noticed about these solo cups that have been part of my life in so many ways, in a joyous celebratory way, is the gestures that we make individually and the imprints that we leave on things. And so this work is to prompt that discussion about how we affect our environment and how our environment affects us. What I did was I took 250 cups, solo cups, and I manipulated them in different ways. I mashed them and crushed them and tore them. And then we made individual plaster casts of each one. And out of the material, a lot of times out of the process comes the data, comes the realization, the eureka moments, I guess. And the cups had this soft, organic element inside, like the people holding them. And on the outside, we painted them with shadows to look like real solo cups. The installation is on the floor. We take them and we put them on the floor, and we prompt the question of who's going to clean this up? And we all love the convenience, but we need to know the information. We need to understand that we can't have this convenience without harming our planet. So solo and together, we have to figure out what to do about it.
And before we move on from this moment, Paula, what is the freedom that you cherish most?
Freedom from fear of failure. We need to reframe failure, and certainly in my studio lab, failure is data. You know, if there is something smoking in the back room, I have the data, and we don't appreciate that. It's clear information, and so I'd like people to embrace the freedom from fear of failure.
Thank you, Paula. You snapped. You can snap. You can cheer. You can applaud. Eric Gottesman, the 4 Freedoms Town Hall, the 4 Freedoms as a platform for civic engagement, for arts-led civic engagement, is partly your brainchild. What are we doing here? What does this mean to you?
This is the art. We've been thinking about what it means to bring public and artistic discourse more into contact with one another. So first of all, let me just say thank you all for being part of this tonight. This is fantastic. It's amazing. We're all kind of marveling at the fact that like this is happening. We've been doing this over the last couple of years in Cleveland and New York and Los Angeles. We're going to be doing stuff in Kansas City. We have a big 50-state initiative this fall where we're having town hall meetings, billboard installations, and exhibitions across all 50 states. And the goal of this kind of event is to bring people into dialogue. I mean, freedom of expression is kind of part of the title of this event. And we want to create forums for people to talk about things, talk about freedom, talk about their relationship to each other. You know, the events that we've been doing, they open up all kinds of possibilities. And I just looking at some of the stuff that you guys all wrote already, freedom of speech, to say whatever you really want to say on campus, freedom from oppression, freedom from, I mean, these are just things that I just saw that you guys have all written. I'm eager to hear more about what these things mean to you all. And this is an opportunity for us as artists to kind of create a dialogue, which is what I think art does best.
Eric, I want to move to Tanya with that idea. Tanya, Selvaratnam, there are forums that exist already, right? There are all sorts of ways that people engage with their communities, engage with civic issues. Why is it important for artists to be here? Why is it important for artists to be leading in this way?
I think if we let artists rule the world, I think we'd have probably a more humane world. Or at least if artists are allowed to bring their voices to the governing tables. I believe that art is essential to democracy, and I believe that art unites us. Art bears witness, and also it helps us answer that question, how do we create the world that we actually envision for ourselves? And I feel like art is more important now than ever to stand up for what America should be and never truly has been, which is a democracy. So I am so excited by what Hank and Eric and the Four Freedoms team are doing with the 50-state initiative, because I think that if you have this art-centered civic discourse happening all over the country and realize that you can bring people together like this, despite the powers that be that want to split people apart and make them unequal, I really think I have faith in the future. I'm so optimistic, especially when I look at young people. They give me such hope. They make me like cry all the time. I just hope I'm alive to see where everything lands.
Hank, you have something to add here?
Everyone is beautiful. And if we just look long enough, we'll figure that out.
So in this notion, and some of you came in a little bit later, so I'll just restate something that I said earlier. This idea of, so I'm going to ask all of you to just hold on to the wine glass. Just, if you've got a wine glass, just hold on to it. This idea of Four Freedoms, this platform and civic engagement initiative that Eric and Hank started, FOR Freedoms, was an explicit reference to FDR's Four Freedoms: freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of expression, and freedom to worship God in one's own way. Those are really important. And there's only one of them, two of them, that are actually in the Bill of Rights, I think, right, explicitly. And they're all compacted into the First Amendment. We don't get freedom from fear in the Bill of Rights. We don't get freedom from want in the Bill of Rights, but they are essential to a democracy. I want to invite all of you to think for a second about which freedom you are most concerned about. Not which one you hold most dear, which one you most value, but which one are you most concerned about today?
Freedom of the press.
Say more about that.
I went to Washington and marched in the Women's March, and we marched by the museum, and all of the freedoms were listed. And as soon as I saw freedom of the press, and it was relevant because we were marching by the museum, and it was threatened already, there was a rise of energy that was enormous during that march as soon as we walked by that building, because it was a very pressing issue, and we need to have a transparent world. We need to have a transparent government.
That was 1.5 years ago. Have you, has anything changed in your understanding of that particular freedom in those 18 months?
I feel that we have failed. I feel that we're not expressing the realities, and there's propaganda out, and people are being conditioned to absorb it. That's what I think.
Thank you. It's gotten worse? Do you want to say more about that?
Well, I live in Washington, D.C. I've lived there for 60 years. I've never seen the city or the country in such terrible shape. And you listen to the president, and all he does is say it's all lies, but most of what he says is lies. And it doesn't get, I don't think it gets reported on conservative media forms. I listen to it on non-conservative forums. I can't stand listening to it under any sense where all he does is complain about everybody else, and he says he's the best and he hires the best people, and he's lost an enormous number of people he's hired. Nobody wants to stay there and work for him anymore.
Paula Crown, go ahead.
So it's so important that we understand history and how things come about. The Nazis called their media, and excuse my German accent, Lügenpresse, which means lying press. Kind of sounds like fake news. And so what are we going to do about it?
Tanya?
Well, I feel I was moderating a discussion at the Brooklyn Public Library last week with Edwidge Danticat, and a similar line of conversation had come up then, which is kind of the hopelessness because of the manipulation of the news. And what I feel like bad times float around. The bad times have floated over to America right now, but I come from a country, so I'm an immigrant. I was born in Sri Lanka. I come from a country that had a decades-long brutal civil war, and it was one of the most dangerous places in the world, along with Russia, for journalists. There were white van abductions. People were scared to say what they thought in their own homes. But I feel like it is now emerging from that. And I feel hopeful about here because people are awake like they've never been before, or at least not in my lifetime. And I take great optimism from that. And I feel as far as the news, it's important to, that's something that everybody can do, which is to be a more kind of active engager with the news rather than a passive one, not just accepting what we're fed, but looking for the voices that resonate with us. And also not assuming that that there are actually two sides, that there are a lot of permutations in between. And I find that the best things people can do is really just like ask each other questions and listen to each other, even those that you might think are on the other side. Because often you find there actually is common ground somewhere.
I think you're right about the common ground. Hank?
Well, I empathize with what you were saying, and I possibly agree with you completely. However, I think from a For Freedom's perspective, we believe that everyone has a place in our democracy. I don't think we want to be visionary, not reactionary. Our president is often scapegoated, I think, as the problem, where I believe we are the problem. He's here, he's there because of us. He's there because we've allowed ourselves to be divided and choose sides, and whoever can convince people that their side is the best wins. But if we have to find a way to be all on the same side, united we stand, divided we fall, and not point fingers at anyone but ourselves, and try to work together through our humility to overcome our fear, anxiety, anger at others, because they're only a reflection of ourselves.
Sir.
Oh, yeah. So, Norman Rockwell captured the four freedoms in four magnificent paintings, and the one that I like to use with students of mine is the one where the gentleman is standing up at a town meeting, and we talk about the painting and other things, but there's a fold of paper in his pocket, and I asked the kids, without telling them anything about town meetings, what's that piece of paper? And they're 8th graders, so they're 13, 14, and I get answers like a shopping list, some just things that come to mind, and eventually we kind of boil it down, and they figure out within the context that it's an agenda, that the people have come there intentionally. And if you look at the painting really carefully, everyone is looking up at him. And it elevates dialogue. And I think the challenge of the initiative is for all of us to figure out what our story is, how to be curious about, I think in connection to what you were saying, the other person's story, and figure out a logical, and I'm saying logical, I think feelings are important, but logic is very important here. Why it is our story is important, and how can we connect that to the story that doesn't agree with us in the moment, and not label that story. And hopefully those 50 billboards will multiply exponentially to create a healthier dialogue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the things about that painting also is that Rockwell painted the ears especially big, because he wanted to show that listening was the way in which we do just what you're saying. That listening was the fundamental part of civic discourse. So yeah.
I love that. Did you stand up because of that painting?
I know. Yeah.
You're the first person to stand. Did you stand up because of that? Because of the painting?
English, history, performing arts. I just stand up.
Thank you. Thank you for standing. You stand for something. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi. I want to get to your initial question, which is the most important freedom. Yeah. And I think it's freedom of expression. In the last 2 years, we've had in our budget the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities, Public Broadcasting, and the Museum of Library Science zeroed out of the budget, not once, but multiple times. It is not about the money, it's about our minds. We have to fight for the ability to use our minds.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Hi, I wanted to talk about freedom of the press. To me, the most terrifying...
Stand up if you would.
Sure, I will.
Thank you.
To me, the most terrifying aspect of that is that we have a president who's figured out that he doesn't need to outlaw it, he just needs to undermine our faith in our institutions. You have venerable institutions that are in crisis right now for a few reasons. First, because opinion has bled into their coverage of the news. You have divided staffs, half of whom think that they're irresponsible if they don't treat the news that way, and half of whom think that they're irresponsible if they do. You also have a business imperative for speed. And they would argue that if we're not fast, we will die, and then we can't cover the people we're supposed to hold accountable. If you need to publish instantly, even if you're 99.9% accurate, 1 in 1,000 times you're going to get it wrong. They're going to get it wrong. And you point to those things and you say, they got it wrong. And you blow it up and you broadcast it. And what happens is people don't look at the people who don't want to believe in the New York Times or CNN will cling to those things. He's given them something to hold on to and say they're corrupt and they have an agenda. These institutions need to grapple with that and what that means. But more importantly, we need to understand those people who want to point to those 1 in 1,000 things and why they feel that way. Thanks.
Thank you very much for saying that.
I stand up. So I think that this erosion of our understanding of history and geography, the role of the humanities, is really vital to our capacity as a society to have any kind of intelligent conversation. And it goes back to the new leader of the Aspen Institute, the role of public education. And that is really, that has been the driver of mobility and change in this democracy, and we are allowing it to fail.
Thank you very much. Go ahead. You've got a mic right behind you. Please stand.
I'm a high school student at the moment, and although I don't go to public school. At a private school, schools are more welcome to choose political beliefs, and I think that actively quashes freedom of expression if an institution that is meant to cultivate intellectual growth actively chooses to side on something. I live in Los Angeles. It's probably one of the most top 3 liberal cities in the United States, and I think the New York Times did an article on a girl who was at another private school in Los Angeles I think she graduated in 2001. She was moderate to conservative, and because of basically intolerance from liberal students and a lack of a dialogue, she became a writer at Breitbart News and is now in the White Office as a special advisor to President Trump. I'm not saying I believe in one political view or another. I'm highly liberal, and I think that it's great that kids are becoming more liberal, but I think that if higher institutions of education, especially public schools, choose a political belief and spread it onto the students, that just actively gets rid of any intellectual growth and any understanding of the other side of the debate.
Thank you. There are so many of you. Right here. Hang on to your wine glasses, kids.
I held on to my glass.
Thank you.
So you initially asked which of the 4 was most important to us. And so I would say freedom of expression, but specifically freedom to express love when it's easier to express hate. And that's something that you were talking about earlier, Hank. I think we don't focus enough on our common humanity and focus more on the things that divide us. And recently in the news with Sarah Huckabee Sanders being expelled from a restaurant, and people thinking that civility is not necessary when people cross a certain line. And I don't think we're going to heal our fractures by drawing those lines. It seems like if we all spent more time expressing love when it's easier to express hate, we might come to some understanding of our common humanity.
Thank you for saying that. Is there anybody who can quote the Lincoln line about the bonds of affection? Nobody? I'll bet you know. You know. There was another one back here. Yes, go ahead. I can't remember it. That's why I asked.
Yes, mine is freedom to compromise.
Oh, thank you.
We all point fingers across the aisle and they're bad and we're good. That doesn't get it. A lot of societies we don't remember. If you compromise, you're in trouble because you crossed that line and went to the other side somehow. We can still do that here. It takes a lot of courage because a lot of people will ostracize you when you step over that line, but that's an important line we have, and I own that compromise, and I think everybody else should too.
It's hard. Isn't it hard? What makes it so hard?
You're often called out by your peers. You're thought to be weak, caving in. All those things come when you compromise.
But even when you know it's the right thing internally.
Even though you know it's the right thing.
Sir, go ahead. Yeah, we've got a mic right there. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, it's I think, a wonderful Eastern philosophy that you can disagree with someone without making them wrong. Just think about that for a minute. We can disagree without making people wrong who don't agree with us.
To add to that, Jim, we can disagree without being disagreeable.
Indeed. Go ahead.
I think that when you look at the conversation that we're having, there's a lot of talk about hate and lack of compassion. And I think that we have a crisis of compassion fatigue. And we are all engulfed in confirmation bias, and social media completely just keeps us there. We have stopped having discourse and dialogue and just depersonalizing somebody by making them a handle, making somebody just a figure that is out there in social media rather than having real deep relationships has put us in a position that we have lost the ability to talk and to just break away from the circles that tell us what we already believe and invite us to have that genuine curiosity of leaning in rather than pushing somebody away.
Mm-hmm. Hank, go ahead. Or you just point. Someone in the back. Okay. Please.
I don't necessarily disagree with what a lot of you are saying about the importance of compassion and civility and things like that. But I teach at a predominantly white university, and I teach discourse instructive classes, so I make my students have conversations about race a lot. And what I constantly hear from my students of color is that asking them to engage in both sides of the conversation is asking them to engage in a conversation with somebody who denies their right to exist. And that's something that you hear from people of color. It's something that you hear from people of the LGBTQ community. And so I guess my question is like, I know you say we should be visionary, not reactionary, but what is the both sides of people who want to have a civil conversation about keeping kids in cages at the border? Like, how does that civil conversation happen in a way that doesn't just further oppress voices that already don't have access to these channels of power?
So, do you have something to say, or were you just saying high five, like airmailing a high five?
Both.
Okay.
Both. High five. Thank you. Because I'm thinking how privileged we are to even have a calm conversation about this when some people have targets on their back and they aren't part of this conversation now because they don't have the freedom to exist, like you're saying, to live. And that would be the basic one. The hierarchy of needs. Survival is one, and some people can't even reach that because they are being shot down on the street, because they're being stopped at Lake Merritt in Oakland for existing, for being who they are. So I think that making sure that we're not seeing our Black people as monsters, we're not seeing our LGBTQ people as people that shouldn't be here, and recognize, we're in a privileged situation to be talking about it hypothetically when there we go when some people literally don't have the freedom to live. So we need to protect our young brothers and sisters of color. And yes, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Hank, I want to put her question to you about how you, when you feel an injustice so strongly and so deeply, and you read that injustice, you see it clearly, and that's the artist's job sometimes, to be the prophet that says, this is not right, this is unjust. How do you maintain civility, or do you? Or is there a time when you put civility aside?
Thank you. Well, first, thank you, Jada, and thank you. Is it Juliet over there? Thank you both. I wish I was as courageous as you are when I was in high school to speak amongst so many other people, and that's why we started off with asking everyone here to be a part of it by participating in our artwork through expressing the freedoms they're for, to and what they want freedoms from, and what they would like freedoms of. Eric and I have had a debate over the past couple of days with a lot of people about us. We are anti-partisan. And people feel like, no, nonpartisan should be the thing, or apartisan or bipartisan. And the whole trick of race, of partisanship, is to convince, it's a divide and conquer strategy. If I believe that you're a different type of person than I am, and then I have to be against you, whether or not I consciously know that we are the same, but we're also different. But we're not different in two ways. We're different in 1,000 million ways. And that's what makes each of us special. And I think I have to go, I forgot my point, but I'll say why I say love over rules. And because my cousin was murdered. He was a victim of gun violence in 2000, February 2nd. The last words I found of him recorded on, he was trying to do his version of The Cure. And he wrote, love over rules. He sang love over rules. Those are the last things I've ever heard him say, and I've wrestled with that. But when it came, the kid who killed him was robbing people. Not my cousin was one of the people he didn't rob, but happened to just shoot because he wanted a chain. He was 17 years old, and chains are popular in the community that he was in. And when it came time for he was given 13 years in prison, but he was given life in prison at 16 years old. And my aunt felt that was unjust, that this boy who took her only son away, that she had at 17 years old, was unjust. And so she advocated for him to have an opportunity for his life. And if my aunt can forgive and hug the young man who killed her only son, I can overcome any adversity. And I think the challenge amongst all of us is I saw some people walk out. I think they walked out because they felt that this was a liberal propaganda. You know, they walked out specifically at times when people were downing our president. And if people walk out because they don't feel welcome in our democracy, we are in deep trouble. And so you can try to deny my right to exist, but guess what? I'm here. And I don't know how long I'm here, and I don't really care. Because I'm gonna die, my security. Eric, please pick the mic up for the anti-partisan. But he's been in it, all the safeties, the reason your family's here, because they were safe and comfortable. Divide and Conquer came because these people were like those people. And then all the people who were comfortable like us, many of them had to leave. That could happen here. So shut me up.
Eric, say more about this.
Okay, and I know there are a couple people around that have been raising their hands, but I mean, thank you, Hank, for sharing that personal stuff. And I think it does point to a question that, you know, we think about a lot, which is how do we make how do we set the parameters of having conversations that allow us to recognize difference and respect difference and not betray ourselves. And it means redefining strength and redefining who we think we are and what we think we need in order to exist with others.
So that we're not threatened by difference?
Yeah, so I saw the same things happening, Hank, with people leaving the room, and I feel like I want to go talk to them, and I want to talk to you all too. But I think that's a challenge, and it's a hard thing to do. I don't know why it's so hard, but.
So Tanya, go ahead, and then we're going to go over there.
I think just taking a cue from what Hank and Eric are saying, I felt this at the beginning, that we can't assume that just because we're in the same room that we all think the same way. And I think it's very important to start with that assumption that we don't. I also think it's really important, there's been a lot of comments about like the one person, our president. I like to riff on Muhammad Ali and say he's the fruit, not the root of the problem. And that we also can't assume that everyone in the room doesn't support him. And what is more important is not to make it about the one person who is destroying us or who can solve our problems, but to ask ourselves, what can we do? And that's kind of where I'd like to see us go, because we all have access. It's something that Betty Reed Soskin, who, if you don't know her, she wrote this amazing book called Sign My Name to Freedom. She's a 96-year-old park ranger and civil rights activist. She is extraordinary, and I saw her speak recently, and she was, anytime you feel down about what's happening now, talk to somebody who's lived through 9 decades in this country, and that will open your eyes. So she was talking about how democracy is being reimagined right now, and we shouldn't forget that we actually have access to the reset button. But the way it happens is by building these communities, I think, and talking to each other and recognizing that it's not about feeling helpless and hopeless, but it's about asking ourselves, what can we do to change it?
Thank you for saying that. We had back in the corner over here. Actually, there's no corner. It's a big circle. Go ahead.
So this is a little unusual. My dear father is in the audience over there. I'm not sitting next to him for any reason other than I'm staff and I'm a little bit further back. But I know he would never stand up and speak, so I'm inviting him to. He and I have some ideological differences, but he talks a lot about where he came from, and he escaped from Hungary when he was 3 years old from communism. And his perspective is really important, and I just want you to share, Dad. I'm sorry to do this to you, but what is the freedom? What is the freedom that is most important to you?
Is this you? Who were we talking? I was wondering. It was in this direction. I had no idea. Who were you talking about, sir? Please.
Well, everything is relative, and I think that this is the greatest country in the world, and it's the only country where this sort of discussion could go on and be applauded by everybody. So keep it up.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's go to the front here. or the center.
An interesting remark on the times that we're living in, because I've been coming to these Ideas Fest for probably the last 10 years. And in every session, there's always been people who have been critical of the president, and nobody has gotten up and walked out. They've sat and listened because there's always a different side. And so I think this speaks to where we are now, that we have sunk so low that people take such personal offense when somebody is critical of their president. And that's why this dialogue is so important, for us to realize that we all probably do think a lot more alike and not put it on the president. So I think that gets to the point of how we shape the future.
Going right behind you here.
Well, I don't know very much about the two people who left, but he shared with me what he thought was important. And what he thought was important was truth. So I don't think we ought to make an assumption. He just may have had a stomach cramp.
Too much mango? Too much mango?
Or
I
dinner
don't know.
reservations.
We're going over here. Go ahead. Stand up, please.
So I'd like to reiterate that. We don't know why those people left. And I actually have a question for you who are running the town meeting. I think a lot of us in this room are open-minded and questioning, curious. That's part of why we're here. And maybe there are a number of people who don't share that same curiosity, but we'd like to get them at these town meetings. When you go around the country and you run these, what do you think the reason is that you don't have more people who are not as questioning, and how do you think you can bring those people into these meetings?
What a wonderful question. Thank you.
Great.
Eric.
I know there's a lot of people, so I'll be quick, but I was just having a conversation with somebody about exactly this, and I think there is a sense that there is a certain kind, we hear talk about the elites and a sort of assumption that that an elevated discourse is an assault on culture, certain kinds of culture. And I think we need to rethink how we calculate how to add nuance to conversations, to public conversations, without alienating people. And it strikes me that instead of talking about ideas, I wonder what it would look like if we started talking about values. And what kind of conversation that might enable if there were a conversation based on who we are.
There's a book, as I'm making my way over here, I just want to recommend an author, Selena Zito, who has a new book about the political revolution. She's a journalist. When she travels, she only takes back roads. She doesn't fly. She doesn't drive on highways. She just takes back roads, and she stops and talks to people in places that are extremely rural. And she was the person who said that the media takes Trump literally but doesn't take him seriously, and the voters who support Donald Trump don't take him literally. They just take him seriously. And so, anyway, sir.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's very useful. So the idea of sort of starting with myself, I was at a panel last night, and I'm here at an ideas festival, and the logo is colorful, and ideas are a wonderful thing. And there were some very well-intentioned people who were starting to express some ideas, and I found myself slowly losing my mind. And why? Because it was an idea that wasn't my idea that I agreed with. And one thing I want to put in a plug for is I want to put in a plug for people who do a lot of different things. So I'm a financial advisor, and I'm also an actor. So there are many artists out here who are knocking out the rent, doing other things. And what I used last night when I noticed, so I'm an actor, so I notice behavior, so I thought I'd start by noticing my own behavior. And I thought, if I were that person saying that thing, like I had their personal history, like I had molecule for molecule, I was that person, why, I would say what they're saying. Like I might believe that too. Like that would be perfectly logical. Now, that's completely made up, but what it did was it gave me a little space to be with the possibility that maybe if I could bring a little curiosity to it, there was something in there that we could start to create together. And that's what I noticed last night.
Thank you for sharing that, sir.
So-
Thank you.
So,
Go ahead.
Hi. I'm a speaker at this conference, and wanted to go off what you were saying about, I guess, anti-partisanship, which I haven't really used before, but I really like it, so I might steal it. So I lead a national campaign to outlaw conversion therapy. And yeah, thank you. So my job, or the only way, and I'm also a survivor of conversion therapy, so that's one thing led to the other. So in order to actually make the campaign work or pass bills, is that my sole job is to engage with my opposition. I spend a lot more time with either Republicans or conservative Democrats who are against me than the people who are very much in, get a round of applause in a room that I usually can go to. And I guess the thing I like to, the word I don't like, which is really popular, is resist. And it works for a moment. I think it works if more of the country was against our president or the current administration. But one of the biggest problems is that he actually has a lot of support. And so the key word I like is engagement. And sometimes when I'm in Colorado, and my bill in Colorado lost this year, and conversion therapy will remain legal in Colorado. And a part of my meetings were, there was one fellow Republican who came up to me. Oh, I went up to him, and I shook his hand, and I said, "Thank you so much for being here." And he's like, "Why are you talking to me? I voted against your bill." And I said, "I just really want to thank you for taking the time to listening to it." And he goes, "Wow." And that, for him, that was the first moment of respect. And he said, "My brother's gay, and I'm a libertarian, so I stick to libertarian values, but maybe I should talk to him." I said, "That's a good idea." So the point I'm making is that I've been leading this campaign for 5-6 years, and engagement is not easy. Resistance is way easier, but it works. And I've passed about 50 bills total in this country, and it takes something, but I'm for engagement.
Thank you very much for both that, you're standing up, and your work as well. What? Who? What? Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, go. He's so important too.
No, that's okay.
Sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm Dan. I really like that comment about engagement. Thank you, Matthew. I was just thinking about that this is centered on art, and that art's enabling the conversation and prompting it. And so I was thinking, what do I like about art? Does art offer something, the way engagement offers something that might help us work through this national predicament? And one thing I like about art is that it expresses the voice of the artist, and that we feel empowered and alive when we use our voice. And here are the cups. I also like that art gives respect to and power to the viewer, to the interpreter. So Paula created this work, but she gave it to us so that we could interpret it. She can't control our interpretation, doesn't want to. She wants to prompt our interpretation, I suspect. So art gives us a way to get outside of the literal sometimes, and to both validate our voices, the creators, but also validate the voice of the interpreter. I think that's awesome. Sometimes we want to make progress, we can just slip a little bit to the side. So I was thinking about these red cups, and they're all red, but they're all different. They're all people, in a sense. There's a story behind the cups, but imagine they're all people. They're a lot different, because some are crushed and some are bent, some are almost just barely dented. But then they're all red, they all have white on the inside. They're solo together. They're the individual and the society. Yeah, I think that identity is a matter of living a dynamic of sameness and difference, not being the same or different, because we're changing all the time, but a living dynamic. In some ways, we're probably very similar. And it's kind of fun to discover it. In some ways, we're maybe very different. And that's also kind of fun to discover. And that it's not about, well, you're always and only X, and I'm always and only Y. And so I can never be X, and you can never be Y. So let's just go on different islands or something. That's not really how we're built. Go into the land of the people, partisan-wise, that are different than you. Watch how different they are from each other. And so I really like the way art invites us into that conversation. It's fluid and open. The speaker, the interpreter, sameness and different, we're all that. Thank you.
Dan, before you sit down, would you say a word and connect that to the wall that runs underneath this room?
I don't know what the wall is underneath the room. I'm sorry.
The Andy Goldsworthy piece.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, who can explain it better than I can? I can. Go. Give her the mic.
So I should have taught. This is my fault, because I gave Dan the tour, and I got so excited about all the other art on campus. This Andy Goldsworthy wall is a collaboration with the architect of this building, Jeff Burkus, and it's an incredibly special piece. So we, in this property right here, at the confluence of two rivers, the Castle Creek River and the Roaring Fork River, which is over here. And so Andy Goldsworthy, his idea is that ideas come through nature, and then they wind their way through this building, and then they exit back into nature, into two rivers. And it's a wall called Stone River, and it's made of sandstone from conflict areas around the world, including Colorado. So sandstone is native to Colorado, but it's from conflict areas all over, and it's a wall of unity rather than a wall of division. And it's just a really powerful piece that reminds us that all of our ideas start and end in nature.
Thank you. Thank you. I was also thinking, too, that as these pieces, these individual stones that come from different places can come together then to serve a common purpose as well, to connect to that solo together. I suspect you might have something to add to this.
Yes, I mean, there's so many amazing thoughts, and thank you all for participating. So I made up one sign, freedom from fear of failure, but I had to grab my pen and make another sign. Freedom from assaults on our intelligence. And Hank is sitting on a bench that represents an advertisement that was shown in Life magazine in 1962. And it brags on the idea that Humble Oil supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. So Humble Oil was ultimately acquired by Exxon, and we wanted to use this ad, going to a controversial place, in a documentary called Carbonation, and we got a phone call that if we used the ad, we would be sued. So I think the great thing about being an artist is like, well, I will reinterpret it. So I repainted it. And then we were free to use it and to have it in the discussion. The thing that is so disturbing, not only about what this is stating, but at the same time, there was a suppression of the science that knew that this was causing problems. And that assault on our intelligence, that we don't have the right to know, access to that to our information, is another really disturbing aspect to this project.
Thank you very much, Paula. We've got time for just a couple more. I'm told that Aspen really runs on time, so.
Thank you. I want to talk about silence for a moment. And when you think about silence in a democracy, You think about all those people in this country that have a democracy but don't express it through voting. And one of the artists in the Four Freedoms has a piece of art called "Grab Them by the Ballots."
There it is. Whoa. Whoa.
And the people in this room have voted. The people that are not in this room are the ones that we need to get out and make a difference in this country by expressing themselves at the ballot box.
Thank you very much. Let's do 2 or 3 really quick.
Really quick. My most important freedom, I don't see any connection to art with it. My most important freedom is to be able to own as many guns and as much ammunition as I think I need. And I don't want anybody else who never owned a gun or held a gun or shot a gun to tell me what to do.
Thank you for adding that, sir. Nice to have a little New York here, too. There was somebody back here? Yeah, she's right behind you with the mic.
Hi, I was just going to say that I often feel like, how can I make a difference? And there's many reasons for that. My chosen career path doesn't have an immediate impact on governance. But you guys got me here, and I really I'm totally inspired by the fact that I'm reminded that art will change lives, and that art is the perfect place for this discourse, because it is where we actually would tune into something and tune into somebody who's of another and listen to it. And an artist I was with in the last week said to me, Gloria Steinem got it right. She said the highest form of human intelligence is empathy. And I just thought I'd put that back into the room, because it really moved me and reminded me of my sense of duty to actually do what I can to promote justice and what's fair and right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaking of empathy, my good friend, the school teacher over here, found the quote that we were looking for before from Abraham Lincoln. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. We are out of time at this moment for this session. And Hank is going to close it out, but I want to say something just before you do. These freedoms are your freedoms, all of them, every one of them. And this art is your art. You have created it tonight, and you will go on creating it with your lives, with your passions, with your discourse, with your willingness to engage in anti-partisanship at whatever level you feel that is, and however you define that for yourself. This is perhaps the beginning of something, but what our friends from the art world show us is our own lives seen differently. And perhaps, as Dan said, we move to the side a little bit and can see new ways of moving forward. That's what we're doing here tonight. You guys are all wonderful. I thank you for participating. Hank.
Well, Hank and Eric. So Eric will get the last word, but feel free to grab us anytime, any moment to talk to us. I realized I was sitting on our prop and I forgot to talk about it. But also I wanted to address you because my cousin, was a victim of gun violence, right? To someone who should not have had a gun. The reason we started the 50th State Initiative, more than 200,000 people have been shot and killed in our country since my cousin died. It almost makes my cousin's death feel insignificant, even though he meant a lot to me. And what I want is to find a way. I know that you didn't want those 200,000 people to die from victims from gun violence. I'm pretty sure of that. So how do we work together to allow you to have your freedom, which I totally support? I'm one of the few people to applaud, even though I don't like guns, but I like the fact that I like them because I like movies with guns and like all that stuff. So I'm not against you, right? And so how do we find a way together to allow everyone to have their freedom, but also recognize that we have common problems because we want everyone to have their freedom. But our bench was a bus stop. This is a replica of a bus stop that we made. So Paula made this painting based off an ad for climate change. It was bragging about how we can burn the country, burn the planet. And then we collaborated with her and a designer named John Santos and made this a bus stop in Chicago in 2016. And what we want to do now with the 50 State Initiative, with all of your help, because all of you have something to say, so you might want to make a billboard about why you should have your guns. I have friends I have other artists. Hey, pawns, guns. See, look, everything's in sync. But yeah, when we talk about making America great again, it's not about choosing a side, it's about having all of us invested and involved. So some of you go to schools that you can do a Four Freedoms project. Some of you work with museums or colleges and universities who could do a Four Freedoms project, which Eric can describe to you. But it's a form of civic engagement that says that if you are for something, help us understand it and give it to us in a way that is not assaulting our intelligence. And so we're going to do these billboards. Take it.
Yeah, so join us in the 50 State Initiative. You can go get more information on our website, forfreedoms.org, or on our Kickstarter campaign. Add your name to our email list, and we can get you more information about how to participate. I think I just wanted to end with one thought. These cups, this wall, these are going to exist long past any of the things that we're talking about tonight. I can probably guarantee that Andy Goldsworthy, when he was making this wall, thought, what might happen to this wall if the Aspen Institute eventually moves somewhere else? Or it's still going to exist. And I think this is the time frame on which artists think. And so to be thinking about all of these ideas and freedoms far into the future is one of the things artists can bring to the conversation.
Eric Gottesman, Hank Willis Thomas, Paula Crown, Tanya Selvaratnam. Ladies and gentlemen, all of you as well, please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much.